Welcome to Empire Building. I'm Wendy Papazan, and together with my 4 co-hosts, we bring you weekly unfiltered conversations about leadership, growing a big empire, and living on your own terms.
I'm Kimber Levitt-Keaty. We are investors and wealth builders with over $75 million in combined net worth.
I'm Sarah Reynolds. We are visionaries who built more than 50 businesses with over $122 million in annual revenue.
I'm Tiffany Fikes. We've led thousands of people and do it all while being pretty good moms.
And I'm Seychelle Van Poole. We are your podcast to learn how to build big businesses and even bigger lives. Welcome back to the Empire Building Podcast. Today, you have Seychelle and Kimber here on recording, and I'm so excited to be with you today, Kimber. How is everything in your world?
Well, you know, it's a fun time. It's a little bit wild, and I feel like we are definitely in the land of like all things boy in our house. So I'm here today, despite like a trail of Legos from the lovely Cam, but it's all good. How about you?
Oh my gosh. I'm in the land of all things bedazzled, and also Quinn has discovered my trolls that I had from when I was younger that I kept in like a little memory box. I'm dating myself. Thank you. And she took them to school today so her friends could all see them. And I was like, don't your friends have them? And she was like, Mom, all my friends' parents are like 10 years younger than you. They don't have trolls, Mom, from when they were children. I was like,
I know. They have a way of like, talk about, you know, even our conversation today around like how these difficult conversations make us stronger, both as parents and in our business. Our kids somehow never have a problem leaning into a tough conversation with them.
I'm so excited we're covering this topic today. In the school of life, right? Difficult people are our faculty. And sometimes there are children, sometimes there are team members, sometimes there are other people on other sides of deals. But they teach us those most important spiritual lessons, right? The lessons that you would be most unlikely to learn on our own. And I love that Mark Rosen gave us that quote. And it's really why the episode that we're covering today really matters. And that is why tough conversations make you a stronger leader. Because difficult people are unavoidable, but how we handle them is truly what shapes our success. So today, we're going to give you some real strategies for navigating tough conversations and how to protect your energy in that, which is so important. So I am so excited to cover this because this has been a lifelong journey for me in learning how to do this. And it has made such a difference in my world. And so I'm so excited that we're covering it today.
It is. And I think it's, you know, the reality, especially today, that like we all even might show up as the difficult people, right? So it's sometimes that it's really, you have to deal with it, right? That first strategy. You don't, especially I think from a leadership perspective, a parent perspective, like it is not an option, right? To kind of lean out of it. So when we think about the ignoring of big issues, that sometimes the idea of like, I'm just going to put my blinders up and pretend like this issue isn't a problem. And the reality is it often makes it worse, that delaying or avoiding the conversation is actually the fuel to sometimes make the issue even bigger than it needs to be. So this idea of like step one, when you're doing it, is like eat the frog, have the hard conversation, lean into it. We often say like run to the fire, run to the problem, lean into the hard, don't procrastinate around it, and really just acknowledge like, you know what, this is the thing I'm going to have to do. It's the same thing when we think about, hey, what's the activity maybe you're most going to avoid in your day? You might put that at the top. Same thing around the difficult conversation. Like get it in there, because the idea that I'm just going to put it off often just makes it bigger.
When you say that, I still get a little lump in my throat, Kimber, when you say just like have the tough conversation first. And I think about how many years I avoided the tough conversations. Like I am naturally a people pleaser, like being raised as like, you know, in the South, it was like, you respect your elders. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. Like you didn't really have an opportunity to have those conversations. So I really had to learn that as an adult on how to do that, because I didn't learn how to have those conversations when I was a kid. I just avoided them. And you know, I think about how I have had to shift my mindset around confrontation and around understanding that like the relationship is the conversation. And so when I avoid the conversation, I'm actually not honoring the relationship in that. But even still, like having had now a couple of decades of practice with this, I still find myself, I don't know if any of you listening out there feel that, but when you said just eat the frog, have the conversation, just get it over with, I'm like, oh, I don't know if you have that at all, but like, and I didn't even have to have that conversation today.
Yep. You're like, I didn't even have to have a hard conversation. I think sometimes when you think about the conversation you're avoiding is often like the person that you're avoiding. And so is it like delaying this ability to start to move or to reset the table or to get a better path? And I think that's, as you're thinking about it, I'm sure you might have one in your mind right now. Like, is there a conversation that you have been delaying, avoiding, a person that, you know what, like, I just need to lean into this framework of a conversation, even just like writing it down. Like, what do you need to do for yourself that helps kind of prepare, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. But this idea that not having it doesn't actually soften or sort of eliminate the issue. So when you're not first is sort of, okay, difficult people are going to come in and out of our lives. And how do you actually set yourself up for success in that? So I'm excited to unpack this a little bit more.
I love that. So let's talk about how you prepare for the conversation. And if you have to have a tough conversation in your world, chances are you may be feeling this way. You may be thinking about, how you want to have it. And I think the first thing that is always helpful, which is step 2, right? You have to acknowledge you have the conversation, step 1. Number 2 is to start by examining yourself. And before we blame another person, and this is also great parenting advice for those of you with children, before we blame the other person of they did this wrong, they offended me, they disrespected me, they're doing this. The first thing I always like to do is to say, okay, let's take a step back and have you ask a question. Is this a pattern for me? Am I getting triggered or am I having problems with multiple people or am I continuing to have the same problem with the same person? Is there a pattern here I need to look at and recognize? The second part of that is to say, what is my role in this situation? Oftentimes, we have DNA in a problem that we need to recognize before we go into that difficult conversation. Because if we can start that conversation with ownership of some kind, it's going to immediately diffuse the situation. Because as we all know, whenever there's a problem, there's your truth about how it happened. There's their truth about how it happened. And we always know that the actual truth is somewhere in between. It's probably a little bit of yes on both. And so really asking yourself, what's my DNA or my role in the situation allows you to diffuse the conversation before you even walk into it because you're owning your part. Then the next part is to ask the question of, am I upset about their actual actions, or actually am I upset about my expectations of them? Did I put an expectation or did I put something on this person that they don't even know they're not living up to? How many times have we had relationships go sideways or conversations go sideways because the other person literally had no idea what we were expecting of them? So I think it's important for us to realize, like, did they actually do something to me? Or is there an unmet expectation that they don't even realize exists? And I think being vulnerable and real with where you are in that situation actually allows you to be authentic when you're preparing for this conversation. And it's going to allow for a more honest, less emotionally charged conversation when you're having it that will bring forth what you want instead of creating an explosion, which is probably the reason why you're avoiding the conversation to begin with.
Yeah, I think as a leader, this is such a big one. I mean, really on all aspects of our lives, when you're leading a team, right? Because you may, like, sometimes you're fired up about something. Somebody missed a step. Something's happened, right? That you got to address. They're not performing in the role to your standards. And I think this DNA piece of what you're saying, what role as the leader do I have in having to own, have I clearly communicated the expectations of this role, of the organization, of the person? And that, I think, creates a framework to be able to enter the conversation, to first lead by either acknowledging, apologizing, acknowledging, you know what, I think I've messed up here. I think I've failed to clearly communicate. So what I actually want to do is go back and clearly communicate. We talk a lot about these expectations dialogue, like what is somebody's expectation of how you communicate? And sometimes it's a framework we use in the hiring process. I often say, go back and pull it out. Like if you feel like you're misaligned with somebody, if it feels like there's just like you're missing each other in the communication, that can be a really good framework of like, how do you want me to communicate with you? When something difficult arises, how do you want me to address it with you? Creating that kind of baseline and framework, I think, allows us to then go forward in a really meaningful way and make sure that if something wasn't clear, you as the leader can be 100% sure that the expectation was clearly communicated. And I think that allows that self-reflection is the critical first step. Like, what is the thing that you think is like this big, tough conversation that needs to happen? And before you're like, oh my God, Seychelle, you did this wrong. And you, like, it is like, it's actually, that mirror is such an important part.
I love that.
Yeah. Now you've done your own reflection. You've owned your role in it. So then you're going to move into talking it through before you take action, right? So talking it through before you take action. And I think, Fierce Conversations with Susan Scott is an incredible resource. It just absolutely like a powerful way to be able to think about it. And one of the things she's coined, which we hear a lot, the conversation is the relationship. So we talk about at the beginning, what is the thing that you're avoiding? It is perhaps, it feels like you're avoiding a conversation, but you're really avoiding deepening, getting aligned in that relationship, because that's really where it is. And you always, very rarely, sometimes the conversations are hard, but on the other side, both people tend to feel like a relief of like, oh, there we go. Like that's the piece I needed to have to be able to move the relationship forward. So what is your sounding board, right? Do you have a trusted coach, colleague, right? Somebody that can be that safe space to get input, brainstorm solutions. I love role playing, writing down the conversation, like so that I have my thoughts really clearly out. And I think this isn't like talk it through with everybody in the office before you talk to the person.
That's a good clarifying question there.
I think that's actually something you have to really think about. Who can, it should be, right? Is there a coach? Is there a supervisor? Is there a business partner that you can walk through? Because that also can help. If your self-reflection didn't give you as much of your DNA, somebody who's worked with you in a coaching capacity in particular can then potentially identify a pattern that maybe you're just not seeing as a blind spot. And that can be really helpful. And walking it through. This has been, I think, one of our, especially when we're having potentially transition conversations with somebody in the organization, having a really clear, hey, this is the framework of that conversation. And I usually start by asking a ton of questions of them, right? Like, how do you think you're doing in the role? Where do you think your biggest strengths are? What are you most proud of that you've accomplished in the last month? Where do you feel like the biggest gaps are? Where do you feel like you need more support? And a lot of times that will help give some framework. Like I've started with curiosity so that I can then build back up to the conversation we need to have.
I love that one. And the other thing I think about with this is most people want to do a good job. Most people don't want to be in conflict, and most people don't like friction. And so if they're experiencing friction or they feel like they're failing in a role, I think as a leader, it's important for us to assume positive intent as a part of this talking it through. I truly believe that 9.9 out of 10 people don't want to fail, don't want to fall, don't want to look back, they don't want to disappoint you, and they certainly don't want to screw up. And so I think when we assume positive intent as a part of this process, it allows us to make sure when we're practicing that we're coming to the table with kind of our hands open and our hearts open a little bit, which I know that sounds a little cheesy, but I mean that in a sincere way of like, I'm going to assume that neither of us want to be in friction right now. I'm going to assume that we want this to be an amazing client experience. I'm going to assume, right, positive intent that you're doing the very best you can with the tools, expectations, knowledge that you have. And so that's something I always try to keep in mind when we're getting ready to have a difficult conversation is assuming that the person on the other side of the table actually wants something positive and they don't want something negative.
And I think that piece is this story that you're telling yourself. Sometimes when it's back to the first one, when you delay that conversation, a lot of times you aren't delaying the feeling around it. You're not delaying the emotion. You're often just making it bigger. And that sometimes we have built up this incredible story in our head that is actually that we really first have to like put down, talk through before you can actually move into the conversation and come into it with a clear head and really regulating some of those big emotions.
I love that. That's so good. Then the next part is how do we actually approach this person and how do we set up the conversation? And so step 4 of this is actually approach the person for a private discussion. And I know that sounds like a duh, but I can tell you, I have had people approach me for difficult conversations in very public ways before, and it does not go as well as private conversations would. So just pro tip, do this in private, okay? We always praise in public. You have tough conversations in private. And this is the hardest part, but it is essential. And so here's a couple of pro tips for how you want to go about this. The first one is like a good script on setting up the conversation is like, hey, I could really use your help on X subject. Is there a good time where you and I could meet and talk about it? Okay. That is going to be received so much better than what I often get on a text or a conversation, which is, do you have a minute?
Got a minute?
You got a minute, y'all? There is nothing that triggers someone more than, do you have a minute? Or, hey, can you come into my office right now? Like, that is a triggering statement because they don't know if they're coming in to get the Employee of the Month award or if they're coming in to get fired. So you're immediately putting up and the lack of clarity, fear, right, becomes a driver. And so you don't want to put somebody into a defensive or fear-based emotion before coming into a tough conversation. So if you say, hey, I could really use your help on X, or, I'm really struggling with X and I would really love to work through it with you. Can we meet today about that? Or can we sit down and talk about it for a minute? I can promise you the directness of that actually is going to lower their defensiveness and they're going to walk in more open to collaboration because they already know what the topic is going to be around. So I want you to know, please take us to heart on that because I can tell you, I still have team members sometimes that'll text me, do you have a minute? And it's literally in the 30 seconds before I respond, I've literally gone through my head of they're quitting, someone died, are they in a car crash, are they getting abducted, am I getting sued? I don't know if you get that, but all of that is going through my head before I respond back with, sure, what are we meeting about? Literally, I have done that full circle. So just do us all a favor and tell them what you want to talk to them about. And then here's how you approach that. The first thing is to sit down and say, I'm just going to use an example here, right? But I would love to talk to you about this client that decided not to hire us. Can you tell me your perspective of what happened? I really want to understand from your perspective what happened on your side before I share with you the feedback I got from the client or before, I kind of share some of my thoughts. Tell me your experience, let them feel heard, okay? And look for the hidden behavior, maybe the missing education, the missing expectation, truly listen. And for me, when I do this part of the conversation, I always tell them, I am going to take notes while you are talking to me right now because I want to be in active listening mode instead of in my own personal narrative mode. If I'm not actively taking notes on what they are saying for me personally, I'm telling myself a story instead. So I would say hey, I'm going to take some notes while we're talking here, and I'm going to reiterate back to you what I'm hearing from you because I want to make sure I'm really understanding from your perspective what happened. You do it however works best for you, but I've just found that helps me to stay calm and neutral. It keeps me in curiosity. And something else to consider is to use I statements instead of you. You lost this client, right? Or you screwed up with this. I'm observing we as a team didn't get this client to hire us. I would love to understand from your perspective what happened. Sounds very different than you went on an appointment and you lost this client and I want to talk it through. That's a very different receptiveness that you're going to get in that conversation.
Yes. You put a lot of gold in there, Say. I think that really that setting time and not having it be a week later, right? If you're trying to discuss something big, but not hey, come on in my office. We need to talk for a minute. Even if it's just saying, hey, can we grab some time at 2:00 today? I want to debrief with you about, the event that we just had, whatever the thing is at the high level so that people are mentally getting prepared, but also not creating tons of anxiety. I know for me, when people are got a minute, can we talk on Friday and it's Monday? I'm usually I got a minute today at 3, right? Because I'm trying to move to that right now. Yeah, I want to get into that conversation faster so that it doesn't actually fester unnecessarily. And then really, I think that I statements, also the validation of the relationship, depending on I really value your perspective. I really value you as a member of our team. I really appreciate all the contributions you've made to the organization. Really opening up. You're working to disarm. So
I know you do a great job. I know you work hard. Yeah.
That's right.
Absolutely.
It's validation of how somebody showed up, which I find in that self-reflection phase really also helps me calm the narrative. Because I'm actually, you said, people aren't here to set out to want to disappoint you or to let down their team members. So reminding yourself, where do I see this person succeed? Where have I seen the positive? So that I can really find the thing that I could acknowledge as a positive to open up and create some safety in the conversation.
I love that. That's fantastic.
So now ready to you're in it. You have called them in. You're in a one-on-one. You're in a really safe space. I think you also, in that one, 100% bright red flag, avoid the invisible army. Well, we were talking. Everybody has shared. Other people think this too, right?
People have said,
People have said, the people are telling me. It is I statements, right? I statements. And you're really wanting to be very tactical and tangible if there's an example that you're trying to use to get more information around. So the goal here isn't to win the conversation. The goal isn't to, sort of make sure that they understand your perspective and not theirs. It's really to find a solution and a win-win path forward. So if you need to, really setting clear boundaries around the conversation. What's the goal of the conversation? If your goal is to, hey, I want to make sure I really understand what happened with this client, what happened around this event, what happened with the goals last month, right? I really want to understand. Can you help me understand what's going on? The goal here is that we understand the end of the month, like what are the goals for next month and how are we going to be able to move forward successfully? It's okay that if somebody's coming in and asking for something, like no is a full sentence. Like it might be that someone's coming in and saying, I need to talk about the economics. And I will say both no, and I will need some time to take all that information in. Let's set us time before we walk out of this room of the next time we're going to follow up. But I don't feel like if someone's coming at me with a lot of information and pushing for an immediate decision that I know has a broader impact to the business, then I'm okay saying, you know what? I want to make sure that I can gather some more information, understand some of the other perspectives of people that were involved, and can we regroup, tomorrow at 4:00 and I'll come back with you. But giving that boundary of this is an information gathering. Is this a decision-making session? What are we actually going to do?
You actually just dropped gold right there, too, of like, I want this meeting to be an information gathering session, especially if someone's coming at you with, I want more money, I'm ticked off and somebody screwed up and I'm demanding X. Like, Kimber and I often get brought in if somebody's upset or wanting money these days or like is making a demand of some kind. And so I think you just dropped some real gold there of like, how you set up that meeting. Like my goal today is to understand what you're frustrated about or to understand what the problem is and to maybe come up with a couple of ideas. We may not completely solve this problem today, but to come up with a couple of ideas that might be acceptable. Sometimes when somebody's demanding money too, I would say, if you were in my shoes, what would you be wanting on the other side? And so, especially when it comes to money, it is very okay not to say yes immediately, but to say, you've brought up some great points. I really want to take time to consider this and take it very seriously before I can come back and answer that. But I really wanted to take time to understand today what's going on. And then let's circle back, like Kimber said, at X time. Especially with money, you do not need to be bullied in or pushed into a rash decision when it could make a much longer impact on your bottom line or on somebody else's business too.
Absolutely. And really identifying what problem are we trying to solve here? Because if you can put yourself on the same side of the table, like it diffuses as adversarial, like I'm on this side and you're on this side. You're really pushing on the problem, not the person. So what problem are you working to solve that we collectively can work to solve? So if you're having a conversation, someone's coming at you with lots of things. Sometimes I say, okay, we only have 30 minutes. What's the number one problem that we have to solve today? And let's put all of our energy around solving that problem. And then it also, this idea that you can diffuse by putting things into different buckets, right? Compartmentalizing what is coming at you to say, okay, if we're today, I know we've got a lot of things we have to work through, but today we're going to work through this, right? Because you're also building that muscle of like, we're coming into this with a solution-oriented mindset. And then I think on the back end, really creating and documenting the mutually agreeable next step. Because sometimes when you have an hour-long conversation and lots of things were said, what Say heard and what I heard might actually be different. So before you walk out of there, you need really clear to recap. Okay, so what we've agreed to today is that going into next month, here are the goals. Here's the places that you're going to focus. Here's what we're going to track to get in. Here's the expectations around the role. Like you're going to be very clear. And I think as a leader, it's your responsibility to then document that piece you have to bring forward. And I would say, like, I'm taking notes. I'm saying, hey, this is a really important conversation. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So I'm going to take a couple of notes as we're going through.
And then send a copy.
That's right.
And like if I get a client that's ticked calling me before I have to go talk to an agent, they're like, your person did. I would say to the client, I'm going to take notes on this. I'm going to send you a copy of what I'm hearing. Then when I'm having the conversation with the agent, hey, I need to talk to you about X. I'm going to send you the notes of what the client has said has happened. And I want to be very clear that I know you might have a very different perspective of what happened. So I'm going to send you directly what the client has told me their perspective is, but I very clearly understand that you might have some more context. So I'm going to send it to you, let you digest it. Let's have a call or let's have a meeting and let's walk through what your perspective is on what happened. And then we'll come up with a mutually agreed solution, right? But like diffuse the situation, like give them a second to go over it, right? And then when they talk, you take the same amount of notes and send it to them. What I heard you say is, this is the problem. This is what we could do better. This is the solution or education that you need. All right, now let's go execute on it.
Yeah, I think the fastest way to certainly disarm if you're in a difficult conversation that's escalating fast, especially even when I'm feeling my own like emotion, starting to rise, just that reflective listening skill is so powerful, right? So what I'm hearing you say is X. That's not what I'm saying. Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is Y. Like when you're playing back somebody what they're saying to you, it is an immediate way to kind of disarm.
Because then they have to listen.
They have to listen. It's also, they're saying that you were listening, right? Because then they're going to correct. No, that's not what I'm saying. Great.
Okay, great.
What did I get?
Help me understand. Yeah.
Can you say it one more time? I say that a lot. I'm like, could you say that one more time? Like, just to make sure I got it. Like, just to make sure that I'm really
understanding
what you're saying and then identifying the problem. I think the other thing we didn't talk about, like when you're the one initiating it, it doesn't always work, but I 100% really work very hard to get into a face-to-face conversation with somebody. Right? Like that's another way to quickly diffuse all the narrative and energy. When we're on the phone, I feel like sometimes it allows emotions to escalate.
Never text this. This is not a text.
This is not a text.
This is not an email. Yeah.
I think just that too, as a leader, it also communicates the importance, right? Hey, where are you? I'm going to come and meet. I'm going to be in your office tomorrow and I want to sit down and make sure we have a conversation about really the goals and priorities for the first quarter. That sends a message. Oh, wow. Okay. This is important enough that the leader is coming in to sit down with me, to make one-on-one time with me, have a conversation. So really holding that space in your own schedule to allow for that to happen.
I would say too, the last piece of that is if there is key information that you need for that meeting, when you're setting the tone, like in that case, Kimber, where you said, hey, I want to sit down with you and go over, our goals and priorities for this quarter. If there's any information that you need that person to bring to the meeting, that's a good opportunity right there to say, could you go ahead and pull for me, how many calls, appointments, and conversions we've had, or how many, people we've added to the company, or whatever it is, right? Like it's a great opportunity for them to have a quick minute to gather information for you before your meeting so that they're walking in with some facts instead of feelings around it. So if you have the opportunity to ask for that data before your meeting, I think it's always helpful too.
I love that. And I'm really quick to, as we wrap up and think about how you end and go to the next step, if we're kind of in a loop and we're not making a lot of progress, or we need to I can't quite get to the mutually agreeable problem we're trying to solve, continuing and prolonging it isn't often going to change anything. And so if you feel like, hey, you know what, we're not making a lot of progress, and timeouts are really, as a mother with all these boys, just take a timeout. Even if it means what, let's just take a minute. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to run to the restroom. Let's just take a minute and then let's come back in and solve it. Or if you're I think we've gone as far as we're going to get to today, let's wrap up and let's find the time. But I think sometimes you have to manage that time. If the energy is escalating and you're not feeling like you're actually getting to the momentum, even if there's a homework, hey, I want to take a minute and really think about what you just said and what I've heard and the additional information I've received, and I want you to take a minute and think about X. And we're going to come back tomorrow and regroup around how we can come up with a mutually agreeable solution to this problem.
I absolutely love that. That is so huge. And I just felt a deep breath of fresh air when you said that of oh, that's so permission giving to just be okay, we've made this as far as we're going to go. Let's either take a break or let's reconvene and work on these couple of items and come back and do it again. So I love that. I think that's so important. And the last part is after the conversation, after you've had the difficult conversation, ideally you are on the same page. You've solved the problem. You feel maybe a little relieved, a little stressed, a little clarity also of what happened. There is okay. We've gotten through the hardest part, which is actually having the conversation. And now you have your own energy after the conversation that you got to work on. Because who knows, you might have been yelled at. You might have had a super awesome receptive conversation that you didn't think was about to happen. You might have had facts that came at you that you had no idea were even part of that problem. And so you need to handle your own energy at the end of this. And Brene Brown says something which I love. She says, daring to set boundaries is actually about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. And that means that after the meeting, you've got to take care of yourself first. And so after a difficult conversation, something that's really important is give yourself some white space. Don't immediately rebound from hard conversation into another meeting, into another something. Give yourself on your schedule some white space to have a minute to decompress. And that could mean you go for a walk. That could mean you take some deep breaths and do some box breathing, right? Breathe it in, hold it, breathe it out. It could mean you go move your body, go get a workout in, or go do something active. It could mean scream into a pillow if you have to, right? But give yourself credit for handling that meeting with grace. Give yourself some white space to decompress and let your energy and like body re-regulate for a minute before you're going into something else. And so as Kimber said, if you're having this meeting first thing in the day, give yourself some break after that before you go into your other important conversations so that you're not taking the energy of that meeting into something else.
Yeah, I mean, that is pure wisdom. Like, I think that one of my big lessons, I mean, I just did this yesterday. I had a very difficult conversation and I just picked up and I was like running into the next thing. And luckily I was in it with somebody else and he said, like, just take a minute and debrief that because that was a heavy conversation. And it was a good permission as a reminder as a leader that like sometimes we are compartmentalizing so much because that's how you're making it through the day as an empire builder. And I think, say, what you're saying is so powerful. Look for the white space. If you know you have a hard conversation, don't back up to another hard conversation or another big decision point right after it. Like, build that into your schedule. Know, like, you know, if I can get a 30-minute break into this before I jump back into the next thing, that's just going to allow me to reset, manage the energy, and celebrate that you did the hard thing, right? Because difficult people, difficult conversations, aren't going anywhere. And I think part of what makes us strong empire builders is that we are leaning into the hard. And part of that is also getting to the other side of it. So it's a great opportunity to go out there, build that big business, build that big life, and engage and celebrate with difficult people.
I love that. Thanks for joining us today and have a great week. Bye, guys.
Bye.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions of the guest represent those of the guest and not Keller Williams Realty LLC and its affiliates, and should not be construed as financial, economic, legal, tax, or other advice. This podcast is provided without any warranty or guarantee of its accuracy, completeness, timeliness, or results from using the information.